In this video, I'm gonna take you through 5 of my favorite compositions when it comes to engagement and couples portraits. Let's get into it. My name is Pi, and I'm one of the founders of Lynn and Jersa Photography and SLRLounge.com. We're teaming up with Adorama to bring you a new series of photography tutorials called Master Your Craft right here on Adorama TV. So let's dive in. Hello, my friends. My name is Pi. Welcome to Adorama TV. If you know me, you know how I like to do. I like to get straight into things, no dilly-dallying or wasting your guys' time. In each of these scenes, what I'm going to do is show you one of my favorite compositions. I'm going to talk to you about kind of how I like to set up the couple. This could be engagement, could be wedding, anything. And I'll give you some tips on that, and then what kind of lens I like to shoot with, the settings. And I'm also going to show you 2 different editing styles so you can kind of get an idea of just what it might look like with 2 different looks. Let's do it. We're going to start with number 1. I like to actually shoot from one of their perspectives. So it could be his, it could be hers, it could be whatever pronoun works, okay? So you just basically take the couple and you're gonna take one of them and you're gonna shoot from their perspective. So what I would typically do is when it comes to our posing framework, we call this an open pose, meaning their chests are both going to be open to a single direction. Now, in this case, their chests are open away from me. So they're holding hands and they're essentially looking away from me. And what I'm doing is having one subject walk forward, and that's going to be the person that's in focus. And the other subject is going to hang back, and that's going to be my foreground. Where I like to also tweak this overall posing is I like to play with the eye lines. See, I want the foreground subject, I want his gaze to kind of come down and towards hers, and I'll play with hers a little bit, or that focus subject, right? Where she's kind of looking back down in this one. And the way I like this, or the reason I like this, is because not only is it interesting in creating depth with this foreground, but his hand is leading up and into her, and the eyes drop back into him. So their eyes and gaze kind of keeps us in this little loop inside of the image. And if you look at this one, it's very similar. They're kind of open out to the side. The only difference is in this case, I'm directly behind them. In this one, I'm kind of more toward the side, but same overall principle and kind of compositional setup. Because I'm leaving this side of the frame open to show the mountain and where they're standing, this is in Banff, by the way. It was freezing cold. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'm leaving that side of the frame open, so I have the eye lines dropping toward that open side. Again, he's looking towards her, and we get this nice overall look. When it comes to lens choice for this composition, what I like choosing is somewhere between, well, my go-to focal length would be, say, 35. If you are a Canon shooter and you want a single lens that can do it all, my favorite is the 28-70, which I think a lot of you probably know this. But the 28-70 f2 is expensive, it's heavy, and if you don't shoot Canon, it's not really an option. So if we're talking just a whatever lens you got, that's a 35mm lens, it could be a prime, could be a zoom, but that's kind of where I like to go. You'll notice on this guy, it's actually a 24-70 on the Sony, but we're on a 24-70 and I'm right at that spot, that 35mm spot. You can do this on a 24 as well. Just be careful of edge distortion when you pose. You can also do this on a 50, but just kind of understand that you need to step back if you want to see more in the environment, and it'll have a little bit of a different look. I like the 35 because it keeps me in the action. I feel like I'm actually shooting from, that foreground person's perspective, from his perspective in this case, right? We're at 1/500th f2.8 and ISO 400. Here we're at, this is on the EOS R5, the Canon R5, and we're on the 28-70 f2, that go-to guy, and we're at 1/2000th f2 and ISO 100. When it comes to aperture for this type of a shot, I do like to shoot these more wide open because I want to have a little bit of depth and softness to the person in front, and I want that other person to be sharp and to use that depth as part of the composition, right? So you can see both these are edited with, I think this one's actually Visual Flow Crush. This is going to give those environments a more oomphy and impactful look. This is with Mood, which is going to give it a more warm and kind of like rustic vibe to it, right? But same compositional principles, same setup, same everything. And you have 2 very different editing looks with that. Composition number 2. Again, I'm kind of in that spot, and I like to kind of start by working in close to my subject. I don't know why I'm using my hands so much right now. I think this is like a jiu-jitsu thing, whatever. But it's this his and her profile. Again, all you do is you take your subjects. One person is going in front, the other person is going behind. This works for any subjects. Please don't send me messages like, well, how would I do this for two girls, or how do I do this for two? It's literally the same thing, right? So doesn't matter who's standing in front of you. One person is going to be closer to the lens. The other person is going to be further, kind of like in the last shot. Usually for the pose setup on this, I'm doing what we call a V-up. Again, kind of our foundational posing techniques, or what we call reverse. Reverse is basically where one person's feet is going one way, the other person is going the other. So in this instance, they're reversed, right? She's holding onto his arm, and I'm shooting at an angle where he's kind of in the foreground and she's in the background. Notice that the setup on this, the look of the image is very, very different. And that comes down to a few things. Number one, this is midday with very hard direct sunlight. So I have that sunlight landing on her, and you want the foreground person, you want them basically looking toward the shadow side. So the background person that you're focusing on, they're looking toward the brighter side, the foreground person looking toward the darker side, okay? Usually if we're talking about a guy and a girl, I'm gonna put my guy in the foreground, and just because I like it has a little more of an edgy vibe with him being dark like that. And then I'm gonna have her look toward the light side. So this is a difference between overcast versus hard direct sunlight. And by the way, this isn't the same couple. Yeah, they look like they could be related, but they're not. Two different couples, completely different places. This is in California, Laguna Beach area. So the editing style for this is also different, right? I wanted you guys to see where the foreground person on here is kept as a really dark silhouette, and the person here is more, there's more detail in the shadows. You can go either way with this. It's completely your choice, but that's the overall setup. For lens choice here, I would say 35 to 50 millimeters is the sweet spot. If you're at 35, be careful of that distortion again. So again, the person in front on a 35, which you can see here, this is at 32 millimeters. We're starting to get a good amount of distortion on them, which is why I have their faces more toward the center, right? 50 is probably your sweet spot for this particular shot. And I'm gonna be at around f2 to f2.8 for this because I do wanna, again, show depth. I also like having the person in front to be soft, kind of be implied more so, right? Okay, I use this a lot, this compositional and posing shot, right? Number 3 is what I call natural framing or environmental framing. Now this one's in Banff, and it's -20, she's in a dress. We're basically popping in and out of the car for like these 3 to 5 minute sprints as we shoot and then getting back into warm up. And what I noticed was I hopped out and I kind of looked from this spot. I thought, man, there's this perfect hill. And if I shoot from back here, these tree branches frame the scene. And what I love about this is it draws our eyes into the shot. And this one's edited again with that crushed, vibrant look. This one is the same type of a setup, edited with that mood, more rustic look. And so this one has a more organic and natural feel, but it's the same type of shot, right? Here we're framing using these rocks that are framing the subject, and here it's this pine tree that's framing the scene and subject. One thing that I am really careful with here, and I would recommend for you guys, is don't use the foreground object to completely conceal everything about the scene. I mean, we're in Banff, it looks gorgeous. I don't want to, I find a lot of photographers will often use this framing element thing, and they'll use the foreground object to basically only show the subject and not really the environment at all. And that's okay, it's a style too, right? But if we're in a really great location, I still wanna show it. So in both of these, I'm getting at a nice range between that foreground object where I can still see where we're at. It's not blocking off everything in the shot. In fact, in this particular one, you'll notice if I actually show all the images from this shoot, there's actually a wider version of this too that I really like. I don't think it's edited. But this wider version I really like too. There's a couple different versions of this where I'm getting low, I'm getting high, and let's see, I think it's this one. Yeah, these different versions of this where it's also wider. We can kind of see and showcase the whole shot. But I'm only showing you guys the one because it's the same technique. Setup wise, for this is where a 24 and a 35 are kind of going to be the go-tos. You want something wider angle for these types of shots. And this is also where if you're dealing with a beautiful background, there's no downside to basically closing down the aperture. Go to f2.8, f4, f5.6, whatever you like. I do like keeping it. And again, you're shooting on a 24 to 35. So even at f2, f2.8, you're still going to see quite a bit of detail in the foreground. I just like to make sure that I like the foreground to be soft, but I still want to know what it is. See, on this lens, if I were to get at 24 millimeters f2.8, well, it's probably going to be okay. But if I'm on a 24 millimeter prime lens at 1.4, this is going to get so blurry that you don't really know what's in the foreground. And I don't like that. I want my foreground object, that framing object, to feel like it's part of the scene and for the viewer to know what it is. And if it gets too blurry, I'm not a huge fan of that. So just beware of the aperture and don't open up so wide that you can't tell what the foreground object is. But again, that is, of course, my preference. If you guys like something different, you go for it. You do you. Number 4. We're kind of working from close to out wide, right? Now I like to go even wider, and I do this environmental natural light portrait. And what I like to do is showcase the entire scene. Now I'm usually pretty far back, and I'm having the subject just look out and feel like they're part of the scene, like I am here as well as right here. It's a very observational type shot where there's no awareness of the camera. And I like to use the background itself, the environment, to still frame the subject. So here, for example, not only are they standing on like where these curves are kind of coming through, but I've gotten up high so I could frame them against the ocean. So there's this clean kind of bright backdrop for them. In fact, if this were going to go to print, I would actually zoom into this and just remove this little rock right here because I don't want there to be any distractions right around the subject. And sorry that this is still loading. Apparently my computer, a $4,000 computer, is not fast enough for Lightroom. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, so remove that rock so you have a very clean sort of background behind them, right? Same thing here. I want the background, they're framed in a way where, look, if you get too low, you're going to not see any of the scene, right? You're going to see the subjects basically over sky. And if you get too high, you might see too much of the scene, and it might look weird framing them over busy areas of the shot. See, in this scene, if I got up high, I'd be framing them against this rock right here, which would be very busy. In the scene, it was okay because the background behind them was clean when I got high. That sounds weird. You know what I'm saying. But right here, I'm getting down a bit lower, and I'm making sure that their heads are not going right across the horizon line, but that it's kind of in front of this hill. What I like about this spot too is that the hill's very light in contrast to the subjects, right? The contrast is a lot less, and that lets them pop and kind of stand off this spot in the background. So find a good angle where they're not being divided, their heads aren't being divided by the horizon, but it's also clean in the placement of the shot. When we think of these environmental shots, we're thinking of images that are likely going to be blown up. These are going to be the ones that are large in their album or on their wall, and they're going to be surrounded by the smaller shots that are more close up. So don't think of this as like we're only going to shoot this shot or any of these, right? These are 5 compositional techniques that I'm always using and I'm delivering to kind of each client. And of course, there's other ones, but we'll save those for other videos. Okay, when it comes to how to shoot this one, usually I'm going to be on a wider angle lens. There are some, cases where I do want some compression. This is an example of that where I want to be able to make this hill in the background, this other side of the whatever it is, the city, to feel a little bit closer to them. So I'm opting for an 85. It also allows us to kind of keep some of the depth in that foreground to background transition and all that kind of stuff. But normally I would be shooting these on a wider angle, 24 to 35, something like this, 15 to 35. That's typically where I'm going to be. And it's not going to matter too much on the aperture. What you want to make sure is that they're in a clean area. So when you're getting this wide, you really need to be in a good scene, in a good location, right? And also one other piece of advice when it comes to the posing on these environmental portraits, you're so far pulled back, it's not a good idea to have them look into the lens. It'll feel awkward because it'll feel like they're too far from you, where it's like they're observing or you're observing them from this long distance, but at the same time, they're aware of the camera. So for these, I'm always having them interact with the environment or with each other, but not with the camera. Last, going to the shutter drag. I actually have a tutorial on Adorama TV where we went in depth. I think it's actually with this shot in particular, but I want to show you here what 2 different scenes might look like with this same compositional technique. Again, typically for lens and setup wise, I'm going to be using a wider angle lens for the most part, unless in a scene like this where I want a bit of compression or I want to shoot from a distance, okay? Keep in mind that in a city scene, you want to stay safe. So I just want you guys to be aware that if you see from the video, where we're standing is actually a cul-de-sac. There's not that many cars going in and out. Be safe. A little bit of common sense goes a long way in this kind of stuff. But what they're doing is waiting until they have the light, and then they're standing in the middle. I'm going to be around a half second, quarter second, f7.1, ISO 100. And I'm going to be shooting so that everything around them goes blurry, and I want to shoot in a way where whatever that motion is, it's leading into my subject. See here, I'm waiting for this bus to travel across the frame, and I'm using the bus to basically frame the subject. The color and the motion holds us right in the center of the image. And of course, they're holding still for this. All the details of how to do this are in that other video, which is why I'm going a bit quick and only talking about the compositional piece of this. Same thing here. I'm framing in a way where the water's coming right up to the camera, and then it's pulling back. Now we're framing this way because when I go to a slow shutter, the movement of the water is going to create those lines that again draw us directly into the shot. So my composition, the framing, is with the couple right in the middle, and we kind of drop into them. The motion pulls us into them. I love this kind of stuff. It's something that our clients always ask for. So usually if I'm in a scene that would look good with motion, I'm going to incorporate that into a composition as well. And again, generally for these types of shots, I'm at the wider angle. I'm either really most of the time I'm just carrying around my 28 to 70 now. But for this, you want to be in that 15 to 35 millimeter range most of the time. Okay, so that is it for this tutorial. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope there was a bunch of different compositional ideas you got from this. If you dig my style of teaching, of course, the SLR Lounge library is literally an A to Z training guide on everything from shooting to editing to lighting to business to posing and instruction and communication. All of it is there. But in the meantime, I will, of course, be back here next week. And to help give me some ideas, I'd love to see your comments below the video to help the channel, of course. So I don't even need to say this. You guys know what to do. If you guys dig our stuff, we'd love for you to keep joining us. We have new content and creators every single day. So if you do want to be notified, turn on the notifications as well. And that's it for me. If you want to follow me, you can find me at Pi Jirsa. And until next time, peace.